Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up, you're already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am pleased to put a wrap on Women's History Month by presenting one of my favorite women in this industry in a candid conversation with a guy who's quite used to being the smartest person in the room. I promise you will leave smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. Also, and this is very important, please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors for without their support, we could not keep this free. Special thanks to MedJet, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Tennessee Brew Works, and Better Than Booze. I also want to call out a new partnership between my platform and one you should really pay close attention to. My New York-based pal Lars Murray produces a daily podcast called Unlimited Supply. And if you work anywhere in the music business, this should be part of your daily routine. It's a quick hit, 7-minute long summary of the most important stories impacting our business. Trust me, you will be the smartest person in any room you enter if you make this part of your daily routine. Catch it on any platform where you currently consume podcasts. Folks, let's get down to business. In today's host seat is Cliff Chenfeld. Chenfeld, sorry about that, Cliff. Cliff co-founded and was co-CEO of Razor and Tie, an independent music company that included a label, a music publishing company, and the top kids audio brand, Kids Bop. Razor and Tie had numerous gold and platinum records and was one of the largest independently owned music companies in the United States. He and his partner sold Razor and Tie and Kids Bop in 2018. Cliff is now partner in the music and content platform Good Talk. He's been the executive producer of a number of films, including Joan Baez, How Sweet the Sound, Serious Moonlight, and Concussion. He's also the host of a radio show called Modern Sounds, on which airs on a variety of NPR platforms, and where he plays and speaks about new music for busy listeners who are looking for help in discovering new artists. Cliff grew up in Columbus, Ohio, graduated from Ohio State and NYU Law School, and practiced law for 5 years before starting Razor and Tie. Welcome, Cliff. It is such an honor to have you with us today.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And joining Cliff is the incredibly smart and talented Shira Gans. She is Senior Executive Director of Policy and Programs at NYC Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, where she leads New York City's strategy to support the music industry. Shira has pioneered the annual New York Music Month in June, which is has a $10 million fund for female-led creative projects, the first Mayor's Office of Nightlife, music industry programs at Brooklyn College and in public high schools, and the city's $6 million investment in Power Station at Berkeley, NYC. Shira also directs NYC Film Green, where she helps film and TV productions reduce their environmental impact. Shira was featured in Variety's New York Women's Impact Report, named a 40 under 40 rising star by City and State, and a climate leader by Forbes. She has spent her career working to address inequality through positions with the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Office of Manhattan Borough President, NYC Mayor's Office of Management and Budget, and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She holds a Master's of Public Policy from the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley and a Bachelor of Arts from Wesleyan University. It is my pleasure to welcome these two rock stars to our platform today. Take it away, guys.
Wow. Thanks, Tom, for that introduction, and thanks for having me. And thanks, Cliff, for being my
Thanks,
interview.
Shira. Your intro is, you've done a lot more than I have in a shorter
I
period of
think
time.
so. Your intro is a little intimidating.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, I don't know. Thanks for being a smart person in the room with me.
Happy to be here.
Mm.
So, Shira,
Yeah.
I don't know if people actually know what you do. It's a large music business in New York, and most people work at agencies or labels or publishing companies or in the live business, but you have sort of a unique position here because you're really the person most focused on the music business in the New York City government. And
Yeah.
I think people see you out and about. I think they kind of know that you're smart and important, but I don't think they actually know what you do. So I thought maybe the best way to start this off would be to give a little bit of a description of sort of what you're doing right now, and then we can get to how you got there and what you're going to do with all of the power and influence that you have.
Thanks, Cliff. Yeah, so I work at the New York City Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, and we're the city agency that supports all the creative sectors. So we're originally the Film Commission, and we permit on-location film production in the city. And then year over year, more of the creative sectors have been added. So when I started at the agency in 2016, there was actually no single person in New York City government whose job it was to support the music industry. And that is something I raise my hand for and is the majority of my role. And it's a pretty cool role because I kind of get to decide what it comprises. There's no real playbook for that. And in broad brushstrokes, I create programs and partnerships to support the music industry, both by kind of addressing regulatory or legislative issues or structures that could support the industry, but a little more creatively to create programs that either create opportunities for New Yorkers who might not have access to engage with the industry, or to really kind of break down silos across the industry, bring people together to network for thought leadership, and then to create other kinds of infrastructure around education to really equalize opportunity.
And why should what's the rationale for having the city involved? Is it a recognition of the economic importance of music to the city? Is it more of an inclusive thing? Can you address that?
Sure, I think it's all the above. I think that New York City is obviously the best city on earth. So I think you and I agree on that. And
Except for
people,
Columbus, Ohio, where I'm from.
of course, except for Columbus, Ohio, right? And people associate New York City with entertainment, with nightlife, with music, but we don't always think about those components that are so central to kind of the soul and identity of New York as part of the economic drivers, right? It's like Wall Street, it's tech, it's finance, it's all these other types of things. But actually, media and entertainment is a huge economic driver. So one of the first things I did in this role was to commission an economic impact study, which is now actually crazily a decade old. And we found that the music industry in New York City supports over 60,000 jobs. It's 5 billion in wages. It's 21 billion in economic output. So I think, to me, that line between is it cultural, is it economic, is really it's sort of a false binary, especially in New York, right? Like everything's about money in some way. So, all these cultural components are really also a thriving part of the economy. So for all those reasons, the city should care.
Yeah, and I also think that particularly in a post-pandemic environment, the secret sauce of New York cannot sort of just be assumed to always be there and always work without any extra help or focus or thought. And other cities spend a lot of time thinking about that as well. And so I think that anything that, we can do in the city to bolster the music environment, anything we can do to cause people to want to visit here and expect a certain experience and stay out late at night and know that what we do here is really different than any other city in the United States is important, and you're a big part of that. And I think the fact that the city's made a commitment to that for such a long period of time, uh, reflects how important it is to the city. So I think it's great. Talk a little bit about how you got here, because as you and I have talked over the last few years, you are not coming from the music world per se. You really come from a more of a public policy, um, good government, make the world a better place sort of place. Not that you're not making the world a better place with what you're doing now, but that's not kind of what your origins are.
Yes, I think one of the things that is unique about me in this role is unlike most of the folks in the music industry who I think got there really through a drive and passion, like music's always been the driving force in their life. That's not kind of my origin story. I think my arc has always been a focus on social justice. I think I grew up in a household with parents who really valued that commitment. It was sort of to each their farthest star, you could do whatever you want, but it never occurred to any of us that we would do things that weren't kind of pro-social or in that kind of vein of like working on the larger problems in the world. So I actually started my career doing prisoner rights work. That was my focus coming out of college. I monitored mental health care in California prisons. And then I was a federal investigator at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is cool because I got a badge, which I could like, not that anyone really cared. It was the Bush
Does
years.
that still exist, that entity?
I'm pretty sure that that's a little bit caught up in some of current affairs, but at the time that was still, a going concern. And then I sort of had this moment of like, this has been really formative. I'm glad I've done this sort of direct service kind of work, but this is not the best and highest use of my talents. And so I got a graduate degree in public policy and then, really kind of made my way through different parts of New York City government, doing everything from food policy to social to financial inclusion. And then I was the policy director at the city's Consumer Protection Agency. And my boss at the time, Julie Menon, who was the commissioner, got reappointed to this agency and said, hey, would you come with me? And I'd say at first I was kind of like, why would I do that? I do like super weighty, important things. And then I was like, why wouldn't I do that? That sounds a lot more fun than a lot of the issues I've worked on. And so when she had the foresight to add music to the agency's portfolio. And I just really like kind of blank slate projects. I like to build things out and I like things that are very interpersonally driven, so this has really been an exercise in meeting a lot of interesting people like yourself. And yeah, it's been cool to kind of not only get to build this world of different programs to support the industry, but also I never understood how complicated the music industry was. And it's created this intellectual frame around this pastime for me. And so it's made it kind of more engaging for me to go out to shows and discover new artists and things like that.
Well, I also think I hadn't thought about this before, but I think there is actually some advantage to the fact that you're kind of coming into this, laterally, because, if a sort of music business insider had your position, I think they come with a lot of assumptions and experiences that might color how they're doing this. And I have found in the times that you and I have tried to work on a few things or discuss things that you really are kind of coming at this in a very sort of, I don't want to say neutral way, but almost agnostic way, which I think benefits how you do your job because you're not doing this job to hopefully get a better job at a record company or doing this job to figure out some post New York City job that's going to that you're going to leverage this. And I think that helps in the way you're doing your job. But when you got there, I think the thing I think you're most associated with is Music Month.
Yeah.
And I think people hear about Music Month and a lot of people participate in it, but I don't think everyone knows exactly the breadth of that, how it came about, and how you came up with it. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I can talk about that. I think at this point in our careers, we all have maybe corny phrases. And so one of mine is that my best ideas come from other people, generally speaking. I mean, I think I'm really good at executing the ideas, but it's often a conversation I have with someone that makes me go like, it's a good idea. Maybe we should do that. So when I first started doing the work, because I really knew absolutely nothing about the music industry, I needed to both quickly come up to speed on like, how does this industry work? How does it intersect with New York City government? What can we do? And I had a meeting with Justin Kalifowitz, who I like to say I knew him before, he is who he is now.
Why don't you tell everyone who he is now?
Oh, so Justin Kalifowitz was the CEO of Downtown Music Publishing, which has gone on to grow and become much more. But I think at the time, because it was like a decade ago, it was a smaller company. They were just a publishing company at the time. He's a big advocate for New York City as a music city. And he was like, you know what, the industry does so much during June. We have all these festivals, conferences, award shows. Like, why can't the city do something to recognize that? And I was like, oh, yeah, let's make June New York Music Month. And so it's kind of, like the Stone Soup story, a little bit of you sort of start with this idea of like, we don't have that much to work with. And then everybody kind of brings things to build it out. So Music Month has 4 main verticals. We have a conference that kicks off the month, and we do that in partnership with NYU Music Business Program at Steinhardt with Larry Miller and Judy Tint, who've been great partners to us through the years. And so that's a full day conference. And then we have a talks pillar. So we'll have more than 40 events throughout the month of June, and they really cover a range of topics. It could be anything from kind of how-tos for emerging artists. Maybe you want to understand some of the basic principles. Do I need a manager? How do I use AI? How do I get royalties, to thought leaderships, things around, AI is another example of things like that, or looking at different applications for sync. And we have a performance vertical, which I'm excited about this year because that was sort of an uncomfortable space for me at first. I sort of shied away from including a lot of live music because, one, I didn't want to compete with other programming. And also it's like, as you pointed out, I'm more of like a bureaucrat. So who wants me curating live music? But as I've gotten more immersed in the ecosystem here and met so many people, I've started to be able to partner with folks who do have that eye to emerging artists in New York and creating that platform, right? Because it's not easy to get yourself on a stage in New York for lots of reasons. So to have the city underwrite that and create free shows, I think is an important pillar. And then finally, we underwrite free rehearsal space for artists across rehearsal space in the city. So that's kind of the collection of Music Month. This year, we are redoing the branding and the website. We're going to be unveiling that soon. So I'm excited to kind of spiff that up. And I think with the more cohesive branding, it'll become a little clearer just the breadth of how many events we're doing, and that there's usually at least one event every single day of the month, but often more.
And do people feel New York Music Month in the other 11 months of the year? Does it manifest itself in activities throughout the entire year?
Well, I'll just say the conference is on June 3rd. Everyone should mark their calendars. I think it manifests itself in different ways. I think one thing that's been really gratifying that I've seen really kind of hit home this past year the most is that Music Month has created this kind of community for folks. I think there, again, is a little bit of an outside observer to the industry. Music is both this driving force in people's lives. You have people who feel super strongly about particular bands or artists, and that creates a community for fans and identity. But the industry itself, it can feel kind of hard to break into. It's maybe not always so welcoming or inclusive. It's a little bit like who you know. So Music Month created the space where people from across the value chain and across where they are in their career can come together for free events and really just like meet each other in a space that I think feels welcoming. And so what I've seen is like people getting jobs, people creating projects together, and people becoming friends. And so, there's this woman I became friends with through Music Month, and I was over at her apartment over the weekend, and she was like saying she had just been doing this recording session with someone, and I'm like, oh, she was like involved in Music Month. She's like, yeah, that's how I met her. And this woman had been on the verge of moving back to Chicago, and she said that Music Month changed her mind. So I think in that way, there are all these things that are happening that I don't necessarily even have insight into, but I like to think that Music Month is is a gift that keeps giving in the other months.
Well, I also think that, as somebody who's been in this world for a long time, things have changed so dramatically for people who are in the music business and for artists. And it's very difficult to keep up with that. And I think more and more people can feel isolated from it, despite the fact that we're all allegedly connected. The template for how one does music and gets their music out there and gains traction has undergone such transformation. And now there's so many different ways of doing it. And when I've attended Music Month, I thought you've done a very good job of attempting to address a lot of those changes and have people who knew what was going on talk to people who otherwise would not have the ability or have the access to really hear about this and give them some insight as to sort of trends and what's changing and how to get your music out there if you don't have a partner and how to access live and how to get, I think it's a very good tool more now than ever before, probably because, if you were trying to do this, in the 70s or 80s, I'm not saying it was easier then. It wasn't necessarily easier then, but you were not dealing with the many variables that you're dealing with today. And I think you do a very good job on that.
Well, I'd be interested to hear from you because about, some of your ideas about what's changed or what is you see as the route now. Because from my perspective on your career, you've kind of been a little bit ahead of the curve in understanding markets or how to access them. I know you didn't necessarily want me to bring it up, but one of my favorite things for people that don't know this about Cliff is before Razor and Tie and Kids Bop, he had a direct-to-consumer 70s CD compilation company.
Well, that was actually the first thing that Razor and Tie did.
Oh, it was, darn.
But it's going to sound like, that this all took place back like during the Civil War. It seems so old technologically.
No.
I started my company in the James Madison administration. No, I mean, yes. Quickly, the first thing we did when we started our company was the CDs were just coming in. It was the early 90s, and people were reluctant to sell music on television through 800 numbers. There were a lot of 800 number record offers, but they were more like the romantic hits of 1957. And my partner, Craig Balsam, and I were in our early 30s and thinking that people would get very nostalgic about their childhood and the 70s when they grew up. And people today who are younger don't realize that in around 1990 or 91, the 70s were not as beloved as they were today. They had been sort of, it was sort of the Jimmy Carter disco polyester decade that had not aged well 13 years later. We thought that people our age would start getting very nostalgic about that period and start jamming their adolescent memories on everyone else. So we got the rights to a bunch of songs from the 70s, created some very cheesy TV commercials, sold them through 800 numbers, and fortunately sold a lot of CDs and were able to start our company. And then we simultaneously started something called the 70s Preservation Society, which didn't really exist, but we said it existed, and anybody who bought a CD was a member, and we called ourselves the chairman of the 70s Preservation Society and went on national television many times to talk about the wonder of the 1970s. And that's how our
So
company got
too.
started. But I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean,
I
that
think
was
there's similarities. It's like community building, kind of this identifying a need that people didn't know they have. And I think my sisters were on this. I mean, I have recollections from my youth of like those direct to consumer CD ads and like being there, like trying to get a pen to make sure that you could write down the number in order to get whatever the rest was the 80s hits, But
disco fever, monster ballads. Yes, it was all there. We did all that. Yeah, look, that is, I think, something that people need to remember, in terms of my career is sort of counter programming. Most of the things that we did were seeing what larger labels or entities were doing and kind of looking to what they weren't doing or what they didn't want to do. That's how really we came up with Kids Bop, because at the time we came out with that, no one really cared about kids' music. It was sort of, Barney and Sesame Street. And kind of reflected also where we were in our lives at that point. My partner and I each had families and young kids, and we were more 40-ish and thought, wow, there's a huge void here. And at the time we started that, it was sort of the peak of the major label glory era with NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys and, all these records, Eminem and the like, selling gazillions of copies. And the idea of, making a kid's sing-along record was not the sexiest thing for whoever was running Columbia or Warner at the time. So we said, well, we'll do it because we have no shame, and we don't want to be lawyers anymore, and we have to keep the lights on. So we've kind of constantly counter-programmed and tried to fill niches that others weren't.
And that's what first brought us together was Kids Bop, right?
That is correct. That is correct. We were trying to come up with getting Kids Bop involved, and well, you tell me more about it, but I
Yeah, so
remember.
you reached out to offer how you could help as I was launching Music Month. And then we did this like Kids Bop taxi TV spot. And I spent the day with like the most positive children I've ever been around, who all they wanted to do all day was vlog and burst into song and dance. And then they did this like New York Music Month number, and we shot it in Brooklyn Bridge Park, and we shot it in Washington Square Park. We were telling Tom before, I always like massively screwed up because I didn't get us permits, even though I worked for the agency that permits on location production. And so some park ranger stopped us, and I had to be like, oh, sorry, I actually don't have that, even though I should have that. And then for years, the Kids Bop Kids were in taxi TVs around Music Month. And then, you know,
Did you enjoy your experience with the kids and their parents?
I did. I think at first I was like, they asked me to come, and so I felt, like the least I could do, but maybe I was maybe or maybe not dreading it a little bit. And then I like had the best time. The kids were so positive and super nice, and it was just a really fun day.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and then I think we reconnected again at the start of the pandemic when we were talking about sort of the challenges of the live business in New York and whether there was more things to help with. And that also, it kind of, I think that reminds me of you. You and I were talking, and you described yourself as sort of an entrepreneur and then an intrapreneur.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that? I wanted you to explain that to me.
Yeah, so an intrapreneur, I guess, is whatever, an en vogue term. Entrepreneurs, right, are folks who are out there creating their own companies or ventures on their own, whereas an intrapreneur is someone who's creating things within an organization. And I think, that is a little bit of my secret sauce, and something that I think has made me be successful is having a vision for doing things and then figuring out how to do it in a political and resource constrained environment, being
Mhm.
government.
Is that a word, intrapreneur? Is that actually a word?
I mean, is it in like the Merriam-Webster dictionary? I don't
That's
know.
that's a word that's used.
I mean, it's used by like coaches. I don't know if
All right,
like
I
people
like it.
at a
Listen,
dinner party.
I'm not on the grid as possible, but I think I
Yeah.
get it. I think
I could
actually
pretend like I
probably,
made it up. I don't know. It's my word. Clever.
yeah. Well, I have friends messaging me telling me it's a word, and I should know it. I'm now showing my whatever disconnection I'm currently
Yeah.
experiencing. But no, I like that because I think that there is a bit of a glorification of the entrepreneur in society today. Like that's a swashbuckling thing, and but there's a lot of people who did that there's a lot of people who are very creative and are coming up with things within the context of an organization that they don't necessarily own, that they don't necessarily have an equity interest, but they're doing creative things like you did with Music Month and other things that are really important and that allow you to flex some of the same muscles and use sort of the same kind of creative energy that one does when one's on their own. And it seems to me like you get to do that a decent amount of time.
Yeah, I do. I feel lucky that way. And I think it's also important to me because I believe strongly in public service and in government. And I think people can sometimes have the way they interface with government might be, I went to the DMV, or I had to get this specific form, or I've seen a news story that casts, specific like functions of the government in a negative light. And they don't really appreciate like the positive ways that government can be used and also the creative ways. And so I think even within government, I think there are a lot of rules and strictures which are important to have, but I think being in that system, sometimes you can forget. But yeah, there's also like a lot of opportunity to do cool stuff and to be innovative and to be responsive. So that's kind of my favorite thing about my job is kind of like Music Month, for example, is really just folks coming to me and saying, hey, I've always wanted to do this workshop, or I've always wanted to do this kind of performance. And then I get to be kind of like the cool aunt who's like, yeah, let's do that. And here's a little like cash on the side, It's not on the
Mhm.
side, it's through city procurement rules. Everything's compliant. But I think it's really being able to be a partner, and people are used to bureaucratic things being the place where you come to get a no. And I try to be the place where people come and I'm like, yeah, let's do that. That sounds cool. Like, explain it more to me. I don't, I'm always having to learn different components of the industry because it's extremely complicated.
Are you less hampered by bureaucracy than as a result of what you're doing than most city people who have some level of authority like you do? I mean, is there a,
I don't think
because
so.
of
I
sort
think I
of,
may be just better at it than
okay. Well, that's entirely possible. But it's, because I just, I mean, I think the stereotypical perception that people have of a lot of government work is that it's sort of endless bureaucracy and it's difficult to actually get something done and difficult to be a entrepreneur. And it does not feel like you have been subject to quite the same level of constraints that maybe because you're so good at what you do, but it also may be that you're in an area that is more open in the sense that there doesn't have 100 years of history and rules and regulations that hamper you and constrain you, or am I wrong?
maybe this is why I get to be on the smartest people in the room. I don't think so. I think the strictures that are in government are a through line, because they're not necessarily, I mean, sure, I'm not like building affordable housing, so I don't, I'm putting on events or I'm creating programs, but I think there is a lot of bureaucracy. I think to be successful in government, you kind of have to think of it as fun. It's like, so, it's on like figuring out what are the technicalities, what are the ways you can get around that? How do you make things happen? To me is sort of like a fun jigsaw puzzle. I mean, listen, it's not like my most fun that I have, but I think you have to take it on from that perspective as part of the process, not the obstacle. And then once you kind of get that formula done, you can do cool stuff.
And what's the hardest thing you have to deal with trying to do this within these same constraints and within a city government?
I mean, I just think I'm a pretty direct person. I'm like a very action-oriented person. And so, there's just a lot of levels of approvals I have to get. There's a lot of perspectives that you have to incorporate. I think that's kind of what makes public policy interesting and also New York City interesting, right? It's such an intense experience to live here. There's so many people, and it's often about what is the best and highest use of a resource. And like people don't agree on that, right? So
Right.
I think it's sort of managing a lot of personalities because let's say, if I have 60 events in Music Month, that's anywhere from 40 to 50 partners at any partner. I'm dealing with 1 to 10 people.
How many of
That's
those
just,
60 do you have to attend that month?
last year I tried to attend them all. And by the end it was a lot and I got COVID. And it's a lot of events. But I also think that's like a big part, it's showing up, I think that's
Mhm.
kind of half the thing. It's just
And you just launched a new initiative to start at Brooklyn College to start a music business
yes.
major. Is that correct?
Right. So, I think one of the challenges in doing the music industry work at the city level is that most of the challenges are federal or international, so people want to talk to me about what can we do about, streaming royalties, and it's like really nothing. That's not something that's regulated at the city level. So what, so they're kind of, I see in these different buckets, like what are the things that we could address that are really within our toolbox. And so to me, one of those things is education, and public education is such an important um, equalizer, especially with the cost of private tuition now for colleges. And so, music, as I said earlier, it's like 60,000 jobs, it's 21 billion economic output, and the CUNY system has just always been this really great economic engine for people who live here in order to get a really quality, affordable education. So we didn't have a music business degree, but there was a lot of a lot of music programming at Brooklyn College. They have a conservatory, they have a sonic arts program, and so we decided that we're going to be seed funding a music business major there, and it'll be a partnership between their liberal arts college and the business school there. And yeah, I'm excited about it. So the minor is going to be rolled out, I think, in the fall of next year, and then it'll probably be a year. And the goal is to have, folks from the industry really be driving the curriculum, helping to write the courses, having a lot of guest lectures, having, the kids have a radio station or a label on campus. Maybe they can do a festival. So I'm psyched about it.
That's great. Can you create a really big music festival in New York so we have something like Coachella or Bonnaroo here? Can you have the
Totally.
mayor's office do that?
Yeah, I was gonna do that next week, actually. Do you wanna help me do that?
What's something that people don't know about um, the music business in New York?
Oh, God. Well, one thing that's interesting that I know we were going to talk about was one of the things I'm proud of and that I did early in my tenure in this office was to help, or really to set up the first New York City Mayor's Office of Nightlife.
Hmm.
And so, sometimes you would go into the Lower East Side, right, to a bar, and it would say things like no dancing, and you kind of thought it was maybe like a hipster, something that was ironic. It was actually illegal to dance in most of New York City because of a mix of cabaret laws and zoning laws. So there's sort of all these strange, again, like all these different components of the city that get layered on top of each other to create unintended consequences, like
Right.
cabaret laws, actually these really horrible laws that were anti-miscegenation laws from the 1920s to prevent either white people from going up to Harlem to hear jazz or, musicians of color from coming downtown. And so those laws have just been on the books for a really long time. And Bloomberg tried to get rid of them. And for some reason, like no one could really get rid of them because I think for people who had concerns about nightlife and its impact on, some quality of life issues, it created a gating factor. So that was something inside of the Office of Nightlife we were able to repeal, work with the city council to repeal the cabaret law. But then, again, about like, so, and that was a great thing that the DIY community really drove a lot of activists who wanted to do that. Unfortunately, though, that wasn't the only thing. There's also zoning rules that still make it illegal to dance
Right.
in large parts of the city, So I think to me, that's why it's so important to have these cross-sector collaborations, right? Because in the way that I don't understand all the stuff about the music industry, so I work in partnerships for Music Month to make sure that programming is relevant. There's so much arcane stuff about the city that you're going to miss. So right now, I know there's work through the Department of City Planning and the Office of Nightlife, which is now in a different agency, to try to get rid of all those zoning rules that restrict dancing. You get into interesting things like, well, what is dancing? Is swing dancing? Like, what do you have to do for it to qualify as a dancing?
I don't know. I think some people should not dance, but not because of
See, there's
regulations.
different views you have to incorporate, like,
No,
yeah.
but that's really fascinating. And, I think that's a great idea to have, an office in the city that actually focuses on there. Are there any other sort of obvious things that are sort of sitting out there that like the city is, there's certain laws on the books that make no sense that hamper some of the, or things that at least are on your agenda to try to work on to improve?
Hmm. I mean, I think the Office of Nightlife was a big one in that it, again, to how we think about the city, like I was talking about in the beginning of our chat, is nightlife is actually a huge economic driver, right? We're like the city that never sleeps. But that's not how the city was treating nightlife at all. We're really seeing it through a lens of nuisance abatement and kind
Right.
of quality of life complaints and kind of using, I think, nightlife entities as like a cash cow just to go in. We didn't have these things that were like these SWAT teams, March,
Hmm.
multi-agency response to community hotspots. You would go in with like all these different agencies and like kind of traumatize people, I think, who were in the clubs at the time, go in, um, give lots of fines. And so the idea behind creating the Office of Nightlife, which was really like a something that started in Amsterdam, this focus on the nighttime economy and having these nightmares, which I was pretty clear, like, it shouldn't be a nightmare to be the nightlife mayor because you don't want like the post, to be like, it just was a bad headline waiting to happen. But really trying to have a more collaborative relationship with hospitality and venues and bars and restaurants so that you could change that frame from this is about like nuisance abatement and fines to, hey, this is a collaborative approach. Let's try to address community concerns because no one wants someone like barfing on their step, or a club that's going to be keeping them up all night. And so I think we've been able to positively do that. The woman who was the first nightlife mayor created MASH. It was like the multi-agency support for hospitality, trying to
Hmm.
kind of change that. Can we work together collaboratively to help entities come into compliance rather than to kind of have gotcha moments.
Well, and I think that New York is so complicated because we want people to live here. We want their families to stay in our urban area and be part of our community and pay taxes and support the place. At the same time, what makes this place vibrant and what causes people to want to come here from all over the country and the world is that energy. And it's a very hard balance. And, I mean, you're seeing it in the Forest Hills thing right now, which I know is not, in your jurisdiction or something that, that you're in charge of. But, I think for a lot of us in the music business, that is, and for those who don't know, there's been, really fabulous concerts out at the Forest Hills Stadium for many years. It used to be in the 60s, the Rolling Stones, Simon and Garfunkel played there. The US Open was played there. Then at some point in the 80s and the 90s, it kind of, they stopped using it and fell into disrepair. And then it's been a tremendous concert venue for the last, I don't know, Tom probably knows, 10, 15 years, whatever it is. And now there's serious threat to it because the local community is tired of it. And
Right.
it's sort of a classic New York battle of, can we have this vibrant thing that makes people's lives special and wonderful? And at the same time, is that fair to the people who live in that community and are bothered by it? And in my point of view, and maybe it's because I just like to go out a lot, but in my point of view, I think you have to try to accommodate this because ultimately having that venue out there is a huge part of what makes New York special to a lot of people. And if there's 10 or 15 nights a year or however many nights a year it is where it's noisy until 10 o'clock, and they do enforce the 10 p.m. curfew there.
I do.
I have been there many a time where
So too.
it seemed that the concert and the artist wanted to go longer and they couldn't. So,
No,
those issues, that's a huge one, but I think the kind of thing you're talking about, the dancing and other things, is just reflection of how hard it is to do this business in the city with all the competing stakeholders and trying to kind of get that balance. And so as a
I
fan, I
can't
hope.
really opine specifically on that issue, but what I can say is I think, you know, there are competing voices, and I think part of it is understanding like how does local government work, right? So community boards, which are both a very important component of New York City government, and that they're like the local building blocks of how the government functions, they also have equity issues, right? They're not, a lot of people don't know how to apply. You have to have a lot of free time. So a lot of times seniors are there and they might have a pet issue around like they hate bike lanes or they really care about historic preservation of buildings. Those are all important views, but community boards can end up having a very strong influence on policy and elected officials, but they're not necessarily reflective. So for a long time, the real estate industry has known like, you want to be on a community board because they're usually the first
Right.
entity to opine on like if you need to build something. But I think as these things become a bigger issue, like it would behoove the music industry or people who are pro nightlife to start becoming part of those organizations, because I think it's important to have both sides of those stories told. And that's a little bit what we saw when we created the Office of Nightlife. It was really like, community members in places like the Lower East Side who were really, exhausted by some of the things. But then it's also like, well, does the neighborhood get to decide? Or like, is it
I
the
think
whole
that's a
city?
really spot on observation because all of this sort of more representative government, whether it was community boards or environmental boards, all things, really a lot of this stuff grew out of responding to a lack of sensitivity to those communities, whether it was Robert Moses, blowing a hole through the Bronx to create the BQE or whatever it was, the Cross Bronx, I'm sorry. So then you had all these entities created to theoretically give representation to people impacted, but then those in many ways are no longer represented. And I think you're right. And I think it's great advice for people who are actually in the music business, those who love music, those who actually have a stake financially in it, to get involved in these sorts of things, because the people who are on the community board on that Forest Hills things, for all we know, it's 32 people who live, near the venue and are pissed off. I mean, I don't know that as a fact, but I do know as a general matter, a lot of the times you're hearing these disputes and these debates, and it's not between, it's between a small group of people who have been able to figure out how to work the system. And, you want it to be more responsive to a broader community. But, that's it's part of New York. But
Indeed.
it's hard to do this here, and it's hard to kind of maintain the uniqueness of it. And I actually, I remember walking around here and talking to you in 20 or 21 after when things were at their worst, and really wondering whether or not we were going to recover from all of this. And I think it's been remarkable, New York's recovery, particularly on the music side and the live music side since then. I mean, it's gone on nationally, but it's really been very special here. I think the New York nightlife right now is as vibrant as it's been, and I think that your office is really helping facilitate that. But we can't take for granted, and
Yeah.
we need this kind of public-private partnership to do that, which I know you're a big fan of in terms of figuring out how to leverage sort of your office and work with really directly with the private sector to get them to be empowered and help you and the like. And actually, people should probably hear a little bit about that, because I think that the whole public-private thing you do is a really important part of maintaining kind of New York's resiliency.
Yeah, I think because I know I'm a very intimidating person, but I think people can find government to be kind of opaque and intimidating. But really, government's supposed to be responsive to constituents, which could be individuals or businesses. And we're really reliant on other people and people in either, the nonprofit world, academia, or in the business community to identify for us what the concerns are and come up with some of the ideas of how to address those. And so I think, making those arguments in a cogent way is important. It's one of the reasons, and I think it goes both ways. So one of the reasons why I think it's important that our office does economic impact studies of our industries is that one, those are super expensive. They're very technical, and they don't really have, we've all seen those things where it's like, oh, great, eggs are good for you, like sponsored by the Egg Association of America, right? And you're like, so I think when government can fund that, it helps, with efforts on the industry side. So that study that we did was used to lobby to try to get a production tax credit in Albany. I think it's also just helping to make sure that the different perspectives are heard, right? So if I'm the entity that's supposed to advocate on behalf of music, then I need to hear the arguments, like I need to hear the concerns, and so we need to work together, like. And I think so that's like on the more advocacy policy side. And then there's just like really cool things that can be created. So again, to Music Month, it's really about people approaching me and then an iterative collaborative dialogue around someone might be excited to do this particular programming idea, and then it's my job to say, okay, that the nugget of that makes a lot of sense and could benefit the public and the community, but this component's not appropriate for government, or that's not how we operate. And so, just trying to keep those that two-way dialogue open, because if you don't have that, then you're sort of making a lot of assumptions about what can or can't be done.
Right.
So like a good example of a cool thing that happened was I was at a meeting with folks from the Berklee College of Music board, and there was one person, who kind of made a comment that he was interested in buying Avatar, which was on the market at the time. It's like this iconic recording studio where every major artist has recorded an album, and it was probably going to become luxury condos, And it was a very offhanded comment, but there was just something about it that seemed like, I think this guy's for real. And so I followed up, and his name's Pete Muller, and he was definitely willing to make that investment for Berklee and to create an outpost for Berklee College of Music in New York and to save the studio. But there was a delta that he needed help with. And so in having that conversation and really understanding, what the city would need to do, I was able to get our agency in conjunction with the Economic Development Corporation to invest $6 million. And we did that, and now it's Power Station at Berkeley NYC. The studio is still a commercial studio. It's the only place like one of the only places where Broadway cast albums were being recorded. And then as part of that, there were givebacks. So now Berkeley College of Music has really helped the public Department of Education create a curriculum for composition. Like they host all these events for us at Music Month. And then through that, some of the people who did events there have gotten hired. And it's really just been this sort of positive feedback loop, but it all started with us just taking this meeting and then like listening. And so that's something I try to be curious and kind of like you never know who's in the room,
That's
not
an
to,
amazing story. I actually didn't know that that's how that came about.
yeah.
So everyone who's watching this should feel very comfortable saying casual things to Shira that may lead to amazing
Right.
results. And
Yeah.
I know we're getting to the end here. Is this when you were growing up in Massachusetts?
Yeah, I grew up in Wellesley, Massachusetts.
And is this sort of, did you anticipate that you would be having this kind of a career and sort of impacting people this way?
Hmm.
Was this on the agenda? Was this likely?
I mean, when I was little, I think there was a period where I wanted to be like a psychiatrist and a lawyer because that's what my parents are, and like have a catering business on the side. I don't think I really understood like work-life balance, but
Really,
then
your parents have a catering business as well?
no, they don't. I just really I like to host and I like to cook. So that was
Okay.
like my own uh slant. I think, I've always been driven towards social justice and public service. And I remember when I moved to San Francisco after college and I was doing the prisoner rights work. And I had this friend who said, like, hey, like if you weren't having a job that helped people, like what would you be doing? And it was this moment where I was like, oh, when it's never occurred to me that I would have a job that didn't help people or was like in that vein. And then no one had ever asked me that question. So I think, we really had a focus on doing good in the world. My dad's a psychiatrist, my mom's a lawyer who worked on issues, that around fairness and people not defrauding other people. And I think that was really a value. I think it was like a really Jewish value. I grew up in a pretty Jewish home around um, just doing good in the world. And so I don't know that I never thought I would be like a music industry person. I funnily ran into someone I went to high school with who was always like a DJ in high school, and now he lives in New York and he has a studio at some music event. And I was like, I'm definitely not surprised to see you here, but like it's kind of funny that I'm here doing that, but I feel super lucky to do it. I have to say, like, I feel like music industry people are kind of like government people, because government people, something you've probably never heard anyone say,
Wow. Is it?
government people who are like, doing important government work are in it because they're really passionate about
Hmm.
government and about public policy and public service and what they do. And no matter who I meet in the music industry, like they're just super psyched about music. They're excited to talk about a band they're into. They want to know like what show I've been to. And they're just generally like pretty great to work with. So
I
because
think that's a very good
yeah,
observation, actually. I
thanks.
mean, I think that people who go, who sort of ambitious public policy people and people who are kind of going into some sort of creative space are generally motivated by some level of passion.
Yeah.
And being around folks who are into that is good. I mean, I was a lawyer on doing kind of completely non-music stuff for 5 years before I started my company. And it was just a complete disconnect for me. I was doing fine, and I don't begrudge anyone who enjoys that career, but it wasn't good for me. And I remember when Craig and I started the company, and all of a sudden I was interacting with all these people who were really, really excited and energetic, as opposed to the folks who I was generally working with, who were great people, but that's the kind of like they were doing this as a means for something else, or because this made a lot of sense for them, or because they were really good at it. I
And
also
did
think
you want to do like, were you like, oh, I wish I could go into music, but I feel like I have to be a lawyer? Or was it like a
no,
epiphany?
I was very music oriented. And then I actually went to law school because I thought I would do some public policy-ish thing. And it just, for a variety of reasons, didn't end up that way. And I kind of woke up at sort of 28, 29, as a Wall Street lawyer doing stuff that I was not particularly interested in. And in a similar thing to you, I was brought up very much to kind of do decent stuff in the world. And when I informed my parents that at age 29 or 30, I was giving up my potentially successful legal career to start the 70s Preservation Society, my mother was thrilled.
She was?
My grandfather, who, dropped out of school in 8th grade and was so excited that I actually, he was completely like, what is he doing? But my mother was like, this is great because you've been selling out and it's time you actually did something that was good.
Oh, wow.
And who's
I love stories about your mom.
whose apartment I'm sitting in as we speak. So I think that, I relate to you in that, and that I was kind of, I think I almost felt for those few years that I was betraying her or something by trying to make sure that Exxon paid as small taxes as possible or whatever I was doing
Yeah,
back then.
that is selling
I
out.
can't really remember, but no, that's important. And it's, I think you've been very fortunate, and I'm sure it's also because of how good you are at this, but you're at a really interesting place where you take your public policy thing and it actually is impactful. It's not theoretical. You're not lost in some bureaucracy. You're able to combine your interest in doing good with actually making it happen, and also in an area that's fun,
Yeah, it's
and
fun.
also an area that you can see actual results in. You can see
Yeah.
whether it's the Berkeley thing where all of a sudden you're getting a school started, whether it's your music month, whatever it is, you're able to do these and hopefully do more, and help, make the city an even better place because we need you.
Oh, thanks. And I get to meet amazing people like you and Tom, have cool conversations. So yeah, I feel really grateful. And I mean, I thank you for doing this with me and for Tom for having me, and kind of thanks to all the cool New York music people who helped me make my job fun and successful.
Well, I guess that means you guys are tired of talking to each other.
No, we can talk more. You
Keep
want
talking.
to talk more, Tom?
Listen, we could go on and on and on. As I said at the outset, Shira is one of my favorite humans in this whole business. I could listen to her for a few more hours.
Oh, thanks.
But out of
Wait a minute,
respect,
what am I, chopped liver?
listen, you are a masterful leader of this conversation today, Cliff. I'd like to have you back in the hot seat sometime if you would consider it.
Okay. I'll
In
have to
all
figure out who's
seriousness,
going to interrogate me.
well, in all seriousness, this has been remarkable. And to the audience, I promised you at the outset that you'd leave smarter and more inspired than you arrived. I guarantee you we delivered on that. I can't wait for Music Month again this year, Shira. You said June 3rd is the
Yep.
NYU conference.
We sent out more information, and then probably at the top of May, we're going to release the lineup, which is really cool. We have a really amazing new programming I'm excited about. So
Oh, well, I can't wait to attend. I appreciate you doing it. It's wonderful. Um, Folks, with that, today is opening day in baseball. Get out and enjoy some baseball, enjoy March Madness, enjoy some live music, and above all else, be nice to each other.
yeah.
Agree.
Here
Thanks,
next.
Tom. Thanks, Shira.
Thanks, Cliff.
Take care, folks.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.